So it looks like now some of our premiers across Canada have also chimed in to the tariff war and put their own hat in the ring when it comes to combating Donald Trump, including our very own here in Ontario, Doug Ford, who have coined the phrase dunce Ford. And there's many examples why, but this is just another additive to why exactly this guy is such an absolute moron. So here's Ontario Premier Doug Ford saying he will cut off the energy to the United States if Trump follows through with these tariff threats. Quoting, "We will go to the extent of cutting off their energy, going down to Michigan, going down to New York State, all over Wisconsin. Americans are going to feel the pain as well. And it isn't that sad." Again, something that could have easily been resolved, sitting down with Donald Trump, which I thought the whole point of the Mar-a-Lago dinner was to exactly do that. But we have such idiots, we have such narcissistic, we have such buffoons in control of these leadership roles that they take this as a personal vendetta, and all they do is add more fuel to this fire instead of actually engaging on putting it out. And this is going to be damaging for not only people in those areas that he's mentioning, but it's damaging to Ontarians. He just doesn't know that. So here's Doug Ford in a press conference trying to tell off Donald Trump in the most stupidest way possible. And please don't mind his face. That's just the face he always looks when the suppository finally kicks in with the bean burrito he had for lunch. He always looks that way.
As I mentioned to the Prime Minister, the rest of the premiers, we need to be ready. We need to be ready to fight. This fight is coming 100% on January the 20th or January 21st. We don't know what extent this fight's going to go to, but we need to line up everything that we're going to tariff and make sure that the money that's coming from these tariffs don't go into a federal bank account sitting there somewhere. It needs to be immediately distributed right across the province equally, and we'll be able to support the companies, the factories, the workers for any issues that they're facing at the time. So it's a good start.
Did he give you any details of where those retaliatory tariffs would be aimed on American goods?
No, Chrystia Freeland's going to put a list together. We're going to put our list together, and I'm sure the other provinces will as well. But we will go to the full extent, depending how far this goes. We will go to the extent of cutting off their energy, going down to Michigan, going down to New York State, and over to Wisconsin. I don't want this to happen, but my number one job is to protect Ontarians and Canadians as a whole, since we're the largest.
I know people are going to say this is shocking and devastating, but I think of it as adorable. It's almost like they're playing a game of Parliamentary Wizard of Oz. Like right now we're watching the Cowardly Lion trying to pose a fight with the evil Donald Trump, like put him up, come on, put him up, I'm gonna cut off your power. I'm gonna go back and write a list. You have the Cowardly Lion. You have our Prime Minister, the Scarecrow, who's still out searching for a brain. Maybe he lost it during the Taylor Swift concert he went to in Toronto. I don't know. Maybe got knocked out after that. You have Dorothea Freeland, who is just desperate to go back to her home and native land of Nazi-controlled fascism, which is why she's trying to implement every faction of it here in Canada. And as for the Tin Man, we're still casting, because it's very hard to narrow exactly one person who doesn't have a heart. This is just hysterical. And he looks just so he looks so just flushed and just has no awareness to the situation. Yeah, we're going to go in and cut off their energy. So, Michigan, you better be ready. Which, correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. Because back in 2003, back in Oct 3, the summer of Oct 3, even though I was only 8 years old, but when we had the massive blackout that occurred in the northeast part of the United States and went into Toronto and Ontario, it was a big, devastating story that would literally was all over the place during the summer of that year. My understanding was that Ontario didn't have the capabilities to cut off the electricity to the United States. And in fact, a lot of the energy from the United States was going into Ontario. So I just don't find this feasibly possible. I don't find this at all workable to actually implement this. That this is just an empty gesture. That this is just an empty attack on Donald Trump. And you know he's not even taking it seriously because he's just so like, yeah, we're going to take off the power. Because he knows at this point in 2024, first of all, a lot of these states have their own power generation. So threatening to turn off the power from Ontario to all these different states, it's not going to work out. It's not going to work out. And like I said, it's going to be more devastating to Ontario than it is for the people in Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York. So he's just self-destructive because he thinks this is a personal vendetta instead of actually sitting down with Donald Trump, which is the whole reason we're in this mess, sitting down with Donald Trump and discussing border security. That was in the original context. That's what Donald Trump wanted to do, and that's what majority of Canadians want to do instead of hearing this whack show crazy circus. So here's from the CBC here. Ford threatens to cut off Ontario's energy supply to the U.S., blah, blah, blah. Premier Doug Ford says Ontario could cut off energy to the U.S. if President-elect Donald Trump makes good on a threat to impose steep tariffs on Canadian goods. Ford told reporters at Queen's Park that Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland will put together a list on items which Canada could impose regulatory tariffs, and so will the Ontario government. We will go to the full extent, depending on how far this goes, we will go to the extent of cutting off their energy, going down to Michigan, going to New York State, and over Wisconsin. I don't want this to happen, but my number one job is to protect Ontario, Ontarians, and Canadians as a whole, since we're the largest province, Ford said. Well, he's definitely had the lackluster track record of helping Ontarians. That's why he also is implementing bribe checks to keep himself in power. He's saying that he wants to do a $250 tax deductible for Ontarians. Isn't that funny? Let's see how it happens as we move forward. But we'll use every tool in our toolbox, including cutting them off electricity, and we're sending down there, he added. Ford and other provincial and territorial premiers met with Prime Minister Trudeau virtually on Wednesday to discuss a threat by Trump to impose 25% tariffs on goods coming in from Canada unless the country improvises security along the Canadian-U.S. border. Canada has vowed to increase border security despite a lack of evidence for Trump's claim about illicit fentanyl pouring into the United States and Canada. Well, all I could say is we don't know exactly what's in those shipping containers that are coming into the port of BC. And considering there is numerous amounts of accusations of not only possible drugs that are being implemented into that border, but also human trafficking. There's numerous cases on that. So maybe we should look into that. Ford said putting tariffs on Canadian goods would be a big problem for Canada and the United States. Asked why he is talking about regulatory tariffs, he said Trump appears serious about wanting to impose tariffs, and the talk is not bluster. I think he's being a little more aggressive than he was in the past, and I say this respectively to the president. He's a different type of cat, to say the least, Ford said. Really? Maybe it's because the last time he was president, they tried to impeach him. They tried to throw him out of office. There was kind of this big, giant conglomeracy to demonize the president, to demonize a sitting president, and criminalize him with the exact same crimes that the other side is also committed of. You think that's why he's a little bit more hasty at this time? And maybe I'm a different type of cat, but I've never seen not so much aggression, but so matter of the fact. He didn't come across this way last time, and it's not helpful for both sides of the border. It wasn't immediately clear if Ford was talking about all Canadian provinces cutting off energy exports to the United States or just his province. But a spokeswoman for Ford, Grace Lee, told the Associated Press it was raised in the call between Trudeau and the provincial premiers. Ford said when he asked Trudeau for more Canadian border services agency officers and RCMP officers, he said the federal government has agreed to put more boots on the ground in Ontario and is prepared to fulfill his request for better communication among police agencies, more drones at the border, and more patrol dogs. The meeting with the premiers was the first since Trudeau had dinner with the incoming U.S. president at his Florida estate. Ford said the federal government made it clear he has plans to address problems at the border, but it has to be implemented. So now, that's what Ford is saying, that he's going to do this cowardly approach of, we're going to cut off your power. Like some sort of stupid comic book villain. And it really is stupid because, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's feasibly impossible for Ontario to cut off electricity to states that already generate their own power. Just seems ridiculous. So here's some of the other premiers that are discussing this. The guy on the right, I believe, is from New Brunswick, and the guy on the left is from Quebec. So here's what they're saying about this tariff war, and it's amazing to watch because it's vastly different to what Doug Ford just implemented there. So listen to this.
Ford in Ontario has threatened to stop selling power to the U.S. amid tariff threats from U.S. President Donald Trump. Is that something either parties here will consider as well?
These tariffs will have significant impact on families and macroeconomies on both sides of the border. We hope it is just bluster. We're preparing as if it is not. There will be no winners in a trade war. Certainly, from Newfoundland and Labrador's perspective, we have no interest in stopping the flow of oil and gas, our incredibly valuable and now well sought after world-class oil and gas.
So I have to agree with that statement there. I have to agree with the statement and the fact that he said there are no winners when it comes to a trade war. Exactly. Which is why we have the responsibility, the ball is in our court right now, to negotiate with Donald Trump, to actually sit down, have our own policies draft up, and try to challenge Donald Trump. But we're not doing that, are we? We're not doing that anyway because we don't have people in leadership roles in this country that have the stamina, that have the ability to go against Mr. Art of the Deal. And that's why we're being pushed around. That's why people are taking it so aggressively and just chaotically in the fact that, oh, I'm going to cut off your power, Mr. Trump. When, as we saw in the tweet, as we saw in the proposal of these tariffs, that all Donald Trump wants, he's using this as an ultimatum to say, I'm going to put these 25% tariffs on your goods, or we could sit down and talk about the fentanyl problem, talk about human trafficking, and talk about border security, which again, every Canadian would agree that is something that needs to be discussed.
To the United States.
Yeah, I had the chance to meet with Mr. Trump last weekend in Paris, and he told me very clearly that we can avoid those tariffs if we do what needs to be done with the borders. He doesn't want to see any more illegal immigrants coming from Canada to U.S. So I think the best choice right now for Mr. Trudeau is to table a plan with money, with a number of people to better secure the border. I think we have to do that. It's a lot better than getting 25% tariffs starting on January 21. So I prefer that than starting a war and stopping sending energy to United States.
So that was the New Brunswick premier and the Quebec premier. Again, actually talking about the ultimatum that Trump is putting out, which, again, Doug Ford has no idea, just making it personal vendetta, just going on to this, shaking of the fist, turning himself into this cartoonish villain, when all we have to do is sit down with Donald Trump and negotiate. That's what we got to do as countries. That's what you do as allies. That's what you do as the leader of a nation, is you talk to other nations and you negotiate. You have diplomatic talks. But no, Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, Doug Ford, and others are trying to make this counter pursuit to wage warfare of something that even the New Brunswick premier just stated there are no winners to. That this tariff war, there are no winners. Everyone gets sacrificed. And the worst people that get sacrificed through this are the workers. Because the tariff wars are going to tackle down on them. And that the premiers, the prime minister, and Donald Trump using this is undermining the value of the workforce that's selling their goods back and forth on one of the largest trading partners on planet Earth. So here's also, to add to this, here's the Alberta premier. This is Danielle Smith, where people have deemed her this crazy conspiracy nut when she asked the right questions about COVID and did some inquiries. People thought she was nuts and chaotic and anti-vaccine and anti-science. People thought she was this crazy nut job, like an Alex Jones figure. But here she is, asked the same questions. Are you going to cut off the electricity? Do you have any sort of plans or retaliation against Donald Trump's trade proposal? And listen to her response. And again, compare that to Doug Ford. How just vastly different it is.
Of Doug Ford's vow to cut off energy to the U.S. in the wake of the 25% tariff threats.
Well, let me be clear from the Alberta perspective. Under no circumstances will Alberta agree to cut off oil and gas exports. We don't support tariffs. I don't support tariffs on Canadian goods, and I don't support tariffs on U.S. goods, because all it does is make life more expensive for everyday Canadians and everyday Americans. So instead, we're taking a diplomatic approach, and we're meeting with our allies in the U.S. We're making the case for Alberta oil and gas to be part of the solution to energy affordability, to energy security, and to, generally speaking, North American defense security as well. And of course, we'll work with our counterparts in Montana in a shared border arrangement so that we can improve public safety, crack down on illegal migrants and illegal drug trafficking. And that's part of the reason why we're announcing this today. We know that there are issues that have been identified that are irritants to the current administration. We've identified those as a problem in Alberta as well. We're accelerating our plan, but that is our approach, is one of diplomacy, not threats.
So you're telling me that we have to actually sit down like normal adults and ration this out? Oh, what a crazed nut job she is. How dare you sit down with someone and actually talk things through and talk about real issues like the border? I always knew there was something about her. People called her crazy. That's the funniest part. People called her crazy for the most rational thinking. when it comes to this. And by the way, Rob Ford, who you may remember, the crackpot mayor of Toronto, the late former crackpot mayor of Toronto. That's not even hyperbole. He was the mayor that was caught smoking crack with Montrealtonians. Even his own brother warned us about Doug Ford. Because when he was mayor, when Rob Ford was mayor, Doug Ford was a councilman who, when Rob Ford was done being mayor, Doug Ford was trying to get himself on that ticket. He wasn't able to do so because people saw right through his BS. And he took his business elite partners from Etobicoke and from North York and from the beaches and from all the kind of, elitist parts of Toronto and stormed in, got a bunch of campaign contributions, and became the Premier of Ontario. Because if he wasn't able to be Toronto mayor, fine, then I'm going to take the higher road and I'm going to rule over that. I'm just going to become the Premier then. And look where we are now. Look at where we are now. So here's Doug Ford again, doubling down the statements. After what we just heard from the other premiers discussing that, no, we're not going to put a tariff war on this. We're going to actually negotiate something out because there is something we can do to actually prevent this from further escalating. But Doug Ford is not one of those people. Doug Ford is supposed to be the business guy. The guy is supposed to open up Ontario for business. Is going to be a comic book villain, a stupid idiot, and try to wage warfare on Donald Trump. That's just going to make it worse for everybody, including Ontarians. So here he is doubling down once again on his own stupidity.
Premier, on the tariffs, sorry. On the energy threat that you mentioned last night, yes. Does Ontario actually have the power to turn off the lights itself, or do you need to go to the federal government and they do it? How would that process actually work? Can Ontario do anything on its own?
Well, first of all, it's a last resort. We power 1.5 million homes, and if they put on tariffs, it's going to be unaffordable for Americans to buy electricity. Just like if they put tariffs on the 4.3 million barrels of oil.
That's not the question. That's not the question. She asked if it was feasibly possible for Ontario to turn off the electricity to all these different states. Is it physically possible? Well, it's a little last resort, and we don't want to go to that place because, Ontario provides power to a lot of different homes. That's not what she asked. That's not what she asked. You idiots. This is why I coined the term of this guy as Dunsford, because he's literally the maniac who should be sitting in a stool in the corner with a little cap on his head. He's not answering the question. Is it feasibly possible to turn off the electricity? And the answer is no. The answer is no. So all this rhetoric, all this shaking the fist and, oh, you Donald Trump, I'm going to turn off your electricity, is absolutely stupid. It's theatrics. It's making yourself trying to look tougher, which is exactly what the Cowardly Lion did. Except the Cowardly Lion actually got courage at the end of the movie. This guy doesn't have courage whatsoever. This guy folds immediately at the signing of a check, especially when it goes towards his own personal finances, his campaign, from his business partners.
That's Alberta shipping down to the U.S. If you put 25%, that increases every barrel of oil by, every gallon of gasoline by $1. So I don't think that President-elect Trump wants that to happen. What we're sending a message to the U.S., you come and attack Ontario, you attack livelihood.
Again, he doesn't want any of this to happen, but he's putting the ultimatum on because you knuckleheads are missing the whole entire point of this. It's, hey, let's talk about the border. Let's talk about your security issues. Let's talk about the fentanyl problem. Let's sit down, talk like rational adults about this issue, and we won't have to resort to tariffs. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable that Doug Ford, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, And some of the other premiers are just absolutely so stupid and blinded to that they think that this is just Donald Trump. Oh, I'm just going to put a tariff on this place. Just cuz. Again, the proposal is an ultimatum. It's leverage, which Donald Trump knows how to do some leverage. And he's putting the ball in our court to say, you guys, unless you want 25% tariffs, you're going to come down. We're going to discuss about border security and make sure there's no illegals coming into my country and try to prevent more illegals from coming into your country. It makes the most rational sense. The most rational sense. In fact, it's so rational that the president of Mexico has already agreed to this. From NBC News, Trump has said Mexico's president promised to close the border. She begs to differ. Amid threats of new tariffs, the incoming U.S. president said Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum had agreed to stop migration. So how is it that Mexico was able to negotiate something out, but our smugly asses won't? And right now, the government of Mexico just stopped a bunch of caravans from entering illegally to the southern border. Because of this negotiation, because of this pact, because of the ultimatum that Trump imposed on Mexico and Canada to come to some agreement on this. And it's an agreement that Canadians agree with. Because as the National Post points out, Canada agrees with Trump on border, lack confidence in Trudeau on tariffs. The lack of confidence was prevailed across the country, in rural and urban areas, and in every age group among both men and women. And all they have to do is sit down, negotiate, hammer something out, come to a deal, and work this out. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science. But you have buffoons, you have selfish, narcissistic sociopaths like Doug Ford and Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau and others that are making a personal vendetta that Trump is going to attack them personally somehow and are going to their secret laboratory to go, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to cut off your electricity. Like there's some sort of Marvel or DC comic book villain. And it just makes an absolute absurdity and buffoonery of how our leadership operates. Like, the United States is looking at this and laughing at us. I wonder why. When literally the simple, and I'm not saying it's going to be a simple answer. I'm not saying this is going to not a tough situation where we're going to have constant talks and there's going to be some sort of banter back and forth. But it's better than having 25% tariffs. It's better than trying to threaten, the northern part of the United States by cutting off their electricity, which is feasibly impossible, and making ourselves look like idiots. Just talk like normal adults. Ration like normal adults. That's what good people do. That's what business people do. That's what people that are supposed to have leadership capabilities do. But clearly Doug Ford, Justin Trudeau have none of that.